And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday, Quarantine Edition, today on a Monday. Today, a little bit of a unique show. We're really taking social distancing seriously. Hearing some reports that perhaps the virus is transmissible through Skype, so I'm not Skyping with anyone today. The show is just me alone. So that's a joke, by the way. But very interesting. Last week here, we saw the UFO subject pop back into the news a little bit, kind of cutting its way through all the viral coverage, the virus coverage. And we saw that get that back into the news, get some reaction. Again, very good to see. Hopefully, we're coming into a period where UFOs will be back in the news after a long period of dormancy, and then, of course, forced outside the public consciousness pretty completely as a result of all the virus stuff. So a week ago today, the U.S. Navy finally decided to formally release the three famous videos that have been floating around for a couple of years now. The FLIR video associated with the Nimitz case, and also the Gimbal and Go Fast video associated with the 2015 Roosevelt case. All three of those videos now available for download on the Navy website. And this is what they had to say. Excuse me. After a thorough review, the department has determined that the authorized release of these unclassified videos does not reveal any sensitive capabilities or systems and does not impinge on any subsequent investigations of military airspace incursions by an unidentified aerial phenomenon. The Pentagon statement said DoD is releasing the videos in order to clear up any misconceptions by the public on whether or not the footage that has been circulating was real, or whether or not there is more to the videos. The aerial phenomenon observed in the videos remain characterized as unidentified. So there we are. The Navy again, taking the lead on this UFO stuff. And a little bit of review. Let's go back and talk about some of the things the Navy has been involved with over the last couple of years. Of course, they revised their rules to encourage pilots to report unusual sightings. And this goes back to April of 2018. Had to zoom in a little bit there to read the date on that particular story. So that was a little bit more than 2 years ago that they did that. They have also briefed senators, members of the Armed Services Committee, on different UFO sightings. And it looks like that goes back to June of last year when that was reported. Obviously, the briefings took place a little bit before that, so they've been involved in all that. And then, of course, more recently, and we discussed this at length when we had Christian Lambright on our show a couple of weeks back, he had filed a FOIA request related to a slideshow related to UFOs that he became aware of. And, of course, the response to that was top secret UFO files could cause grave damage to U.S. national security if released, Navy says. And of course, that happened just a little bit earlier this year. Obviously, the details were written up in great detail over at Paul Dean's website. He and Christian put that article together. And here, of course, we've got the letter from the Navy, basically to Christians explaining why his FOIA request was refused. And here, sort of the key paragraph, our review of our records and systems reveal that ONI has no releasable records relatable to your request. ONI has searched our records for responsive documents. We have discovered certain briefing slides that are classified top secret. A view of these materials indicates that are currently, that seems a little bit of a typo there, that are currently and appropriate marked and classified top secret under executive order, so on and so on. In addition, the materials would trigger protections under subcategory scientific and technological matters, and so on and so forth. As a result, these records may not be released and are being withheld. And going back a little part that I missed, the Classification Authority has determined that the release of these materials would cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States. Of course, the FLIR video that has been released, it actually does provide some very interesting details that have been studied by Professor Kevin Knuth, and he's from, and also the Scientific Coalition for UAP Research, Rich Hoffman et al. They have been able to look at this video and made some determinations in terms of the acceleration of the vehicle, which is frankly off the charts compared to any known aircraft, and also its curious lack of heat signature, which would be evident in a FLIR video, and that is not there. So that Professor Knuth finds that very interesting. I was lucky enough to attend a Zoom meeting that Professor Knuth hosted last Friday afternoon. Very interesting guest, and of course, he went into some detail. It's a little bit outside my weight class in terms of what he said, but my understanding is he is working to get that recorded Zoom meeting uploaded, and when he does, I will post a link at my Facebook group. So anyone listening now, keep an eye open for that. Join the Facebook group, UFO News Network. Obviously, that link will be there, and when it is, go over and click on it. Very interesting presentation from Professor Knuth. Also, Kevin Day and Jason Voorhees from the Nimitz case were able to provide some background in terms of how that video was initially recorded, and some of the other data that was recorded by them as radar operators. And of course, not too much detail. We've had that here, not too much detail on that Friday presentation, but we do have an account from PJ Hughes on earlier shows regarding the Nimitz case about how that some of that electronic recorded data, that physical evidence of those UFOs, was basically taken from the ship in a very prompt order by at least one member of the United States Air Force. Okay, so that is all that. And of course, when this gets in the news, it causes reporters around the world to ask their governments about what's going on with the UFOs. And the defense minister of Japan was asked about that later on in the week. Essentially, this is Taro Kono. Essentially, the defense minister would be like the Secretary of Defense here in the States. Kono made the comment at a news conference on April 28th after the U.S. Defense Department declassified. That's not wrong. They were never classified. After the U.S. Defense Department declassified and released videos shot by Navy pilots pointing to the possibility that UFOs exist, we would like to establish procedures in the event an encounter is made with a UFO, Kono said. He indicated his ministry and the SDF would begin preparing for such an event. While Kono said the SDF has not yet encountered a UFO, he added, if video can be taken of a UFO encounter and if a report is possible, then a report will be made. Discussions will be held with the Air SDF about just what can be done. He said ministry officials will ask the Pentagon, their Pentagon counterparts, about the release of the videos as well as any analysis they had conducted. So good luck with that. We'll see if the United States decides to share with its good ally, the Japanese, the sort of information that Christian Lambright was FOIAing when he sent his FOIA request in and was denied because of the grave danger to national security. We'll see if the Japanese can get in on that loop. So there's that. And also, Kono was, of course, not the only high government ranking official to be asked about the videos that were formally released last week. One other one was as well. Later on in the week, our own president, Donald Trump, was asked during an interview with Reuters reporter Steve Holland about the videos towards the end. Obviously, that's not in the headline. Trump says China wants him to lose his re-election bid. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more as we go along and after we get through this. But at the end of the half-hour interview, Trump offered lighthearted remarks about a newly released Navy video purportedly showing an unidentified flying object. I just wonder if it's real. That's a hell of a video. So that was his response on that. And of course, he's been asked about it before on camera. He's done a couple interviews, one with George Stephanopoulos, another with Tucker Carlson. When he spoke with Carlson, well, I don't. This is the exact quote here, so don't blame me for the lack of eloquence. Well, I don't want to really get into it too much, but personally, I tend to doubt it. I'm not a believer, but I guess anything is possible. And pilots have come in and they said, and these are pilots that have, not pilots that are into that particular world, but we have had people saying things that they've seen things. So I don't assume it's correct, but I have an open mind, Tucker. And then also the quote from Stephanopoulos. I think it's probably, I want them to think whatever they think. They do say, and I've seen and I've read and I've heard, and I did have one very brief meeting on it. But people are saying they're seeing UFOs. Do I believe it? Not particular, Trump said. That was the more ineloquent quote I was talking about there. But asked if he thought he would know if there were a case of extraterrestrial life, the president replied, well, I think my great pilots would know. Our great pilots would know. And this is kind of curious. Again, Trump seems to be the kind of guy, and we've discussed this on the show in some detail, that Trump is the kind of guy who really likes, the different conspiracies, and everyone's conspiring against him. The deep state, all these conspiracies, yet the one deep state conspiracy that we think is, I think certainly has been demonstrated as more information comes out about UFOs, that there has been a cover-up of the UFO reality, that some of these UFOs are in fact ET, and it was I'm not the first person who's noticed it, and Tom Rogan, who is the host of the McLaughlin Group and also is a columnist for the Washington Examiner, has been following this UFO story very, very closely. I mean, he's the top guy on it, I would say, as far as the mainstream media. His sense of this issue is pretty solid in my view. Of course, Tom was a guest on this show as well, so go back and listen to that. We did have some serious sound issues, unfortunately, during that interview, but it's well worth your time to try to get a better grip on what Tom was saying. But after this, he wrote in the Washington Examiner, a final point to note here is that on this issue, at least, Trump is being very loyal to the interests of the so-called deep state he often attacks. After all, while the military has some legitimate reasons, primarily related to nuclear weapons detection security, for keeping UFO research quiet, it could provide more information to the public without jeopardizing national security. Trump presents himself as a man of the people, but on this issue is very much following in the secretive tradition of former presidents. Of course, that is true, but you have to ask yourself why. And honestly, I think the answer to this is pretty simple. And that is this, that Trump simply doesn't care about UFOs. I think that's looking at his answers. They've been pretty consistent. He just doesn't care about UFOs. So that's what we've got. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a disinterested president. And, obviously right now we're looking at either Trump being reelected or Biden being reelected or being elected in the fall. And those are our choices. And we don't know what Biden thinks about all this. Damon Steer from the Conway Daily Sun never had access to him, so wasn't able to ask his UFO question like he was to a lot of the other Democrat candidates for their nomination. So we don't really know what he thinks. So at best, we've got a disinterested president for the next 4 years. I think that's about what we're looking at here. And what kind of impact will that have? Well, it's not helpful. It would be helpful, I think, to have a interested president on this particular issue, but we'll just something that we just have to work around. But yeah, I think this is simply a case of people who are interested in UFOs are interested. Sometimes it's a politician, sometimes it's a president, as we saw with Reagan, with Clinton, going back to the Truman days. We do have very interested presidents, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes they just don't care that much about the issue. Same thing with scientists. There are some very interested scientists. Most are not. With the military, there are disinterested military people, and there are very interested military people. And it's the same with the general public. It is the kind of subject where it either grabs you or it doesn't. And if it grabs you, obviously, it's the kind of field where you can jump right in and make some kind of contribution. And if it isn't, well, then you're not really going to get anything out of that particular person. And it looks like we could be looking at another 4 years of a disinterested president, and we'll see what kind of effect that has on any kind of further information being disseminated about UFOs over the next few years. Now, getting on to our next issue is, where is the Air Force in all this? They literally have been silent on the issue. It's been the Navy taking the lead, and you have to ask yourself why that is. They've got literally everything at their disposal. They have the National Airspace Intelligence Center. They've got the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and the Air Materiel Command. They have the Defense Early Warning Line, a series of radar installations all up along the Arctic Circle. And they also have the former NORAD, which is now since been rebranded back in the 80s to the North American Aerospace Defense Command. So they're rebranding, constantly rebranding. So they've got all this gear, and also there is some anecdotal evidence that the best UFO-related data that is collected even by other branches ends up in the Air Force's hand. So the question obviously is, where's the Air Force on all this? And I think, again, we've got a very simple answer, that the Air Force has the mother lode. They've got the radar data. They've got the gun camera footage, FLIR footage in their different jets. They've got stacks of it. They've literally got everything. And if they were to come forward, like the Navy has, and release even a small amount of what they've got, it would be game over as far as UFOs are concerned. This is something that obviously we'd like to see. Nobody's really asking the Air Force really hard questions about all this, as far as I know. There's may have been this and that sprinkled here and there, but again, they are remaining remarkably silent on all this. And again, I think the reasoning is simple. You've seen the big hubbub again, just caused by what the Navy has released. So when you add in what the Air Force has got, again, the mother lode in terms of real hardcore data, in terms of what these UFOs can do, that they are objects, that they can accelerate well beyond anything that we've got here on Earth. If they were to do that, again, it would be game over. And also, again, when it comes to asking, let's say, the President of the United States, Trump, it's like, hey, you're getting all this data from the Navy. What about the Air Force and all this? They've got to have something, don't they? Again, those questions aren't getting asked, unfortunately. But yeah, again, we don't have an answer, but my wild speculation, and I don't think it's wild speculation at all, is the reasoning for all that is the Air Force has the mother lode. And topic 4, we've got season 2 of Unidentified. Now, if you've been wondering what TTSA has been up to, obviously they've got the season 2 coming out And this season promises 10 episodes, at least according to this, the Cox Media website. We haven't seen a lot of initial promo. They've been quiet on their end, but the time does have to be blocked out and scheduled on the A&E, or the History Channel, which is owned by A&E, on the History Channel. And I'm assuming it's going to be on again Friday nights at 10. We don't know that for sure, but I'm assuming that's when it's going to be. And this time around, they've got 10 episodes. So just looking back at season 1, which was only 6 episodes, I thought it was an excellent show. I thought all but one episode, the one where they did the little road trip to Catalina Island, didn't really add that much. It was something that really any UFO show could have done, and didn't really add anything significant. But the first couple episodes provided some new interesting stuff. We saw the lady pilot from the Nimitz encounters in Shadows recounting her encounter with the UFO. We got the Navy pilots from the Roosevelt case, Aucoin and Graves, discussing their encounter. We got an interesting segment basically slapping down Rich Doty, which was very interesting. And then in the last episode, we got confirmation that there is essentially an inside team still working with Elizondo over at TTSA. That was an interesting confirmation. Again, we've been suspecting that there are still people on the inside working. It'll be very interesting to see if some of our more skilled FOIA requesters make some effort to try to find out who actually approved the release of the Navy videos last week. It would be interesting to see if perhaps that is a member of the inside team. We don't know who they are, but obviously pretty confident and pretty sure that there is such a thing. There's really very little doubt about that. So we'll see. Now, early word that I've received back channel, and again, we won't know for sure. The proof is in the pudding, but the shows are going to be released, is that there will be more cases discussed. It's certainly about time up to this point. We only know of a couple of cases and also some indication that the Stephenville case was at least investigated back in 2008. I got that directly from George Knapp during an AMA over at Coast to Coast some time ago. I don't even think it was last year. I think it was before last year. But so we sort of know about 2.5 cases. Are there some other cases? Apparently there are, and hopefully we get those in the new show. One thing I'm hoping they kind of back away from, although who knows, what we're going to see is more of the fear porn angle, but hopefully we do get to see some more good episodes. I don't expect them all to be great winners, but they had a 5 out of 6 batting average with the last season, and if they do close to that this time around and reveal some more cases, that's the kind of thing that we want to see. So that's coming up in May. Another thing to look for, if you recall what happened just before the show, again, not a lot of initial promotion for the show, but what did come out was that New York Times article where Blumenthal, Cooper, and Leslie Keane were able to interview Graves and Aucoin. Seemingly, they didn't know anything about the TTSA show, but I think there's no question that that was part of the promo for that. So maybe we'll see another New York Times or some other high-profile media outlet coming out with some information about the UFOs. Maybe another case. Hopefully that is the case. But again, we don't know that. But keep your eyes open on Sundays up until the point where the show premieres. We may get a little bit of promotional non-promotion from the TTSA team. They get another story in a mainstream publication that gives us a little bit more information about the UFOs. And again, I can't stress this enough. Hopefully they start veering away from the fear porn angle, because the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We don't have anything to fear from UFOs. And finally, I'm going to touch on a little bit of coronavirus news. It's sort of off topic for us, but I'm going to tie it back into the UFO stuff. So if you'd be a little bit patient. And again, the stuff that I've got on the virus is something that you don't really see. You haven't really seen too much of in the mainstream media. Now, this, of course, very interesting. Going back to late January, this is something that I missed initially, but I was able to get the link for this. Obviously, these are mainstream. This is all mainstream information. So, we're not relying on wild conspiracy theorists or people who are just shooting from the hip. They've got this is data. This is solid information. Public transport in Wuhan was suspended due to coronavirus concerns back in late January, and I think this is very important because what we've seen really in every state in the United States, there's never been an adequate addressing of public transport, especially in the early stages of this viral outbreak. What we should have seen really is shutting down public transport for a week, maybe 10 days, just to sort of get our feet in terms of the mask wearing and protecting yourself in situations where this social distancing has not been, is not possible. I mean, you can't social distance on a crowded bus or subway or even on a plane. And it's to me, it's quite ridiculous. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is a complete breakdown in terms of government competence, in terms of handling issues. We've got basically a federal and 50 state shit show. And what we should have seen is obviously on March the 4th, when it became obvious that there was an outbreak in the New York metro area in New Rochelle. That's when we should have seen some action. My biggest criticism of President Trump was he waited another week, I believe it was about a week after that, before shutting down travel to Europe. It's something he should have done really on March 4th. He did do it on January 31st to China, but again, allowed that backdoor to be open for way too long. He should have shut down the travel to Europe much sooner. That was his error. But then we've seen those errors compounded, especially in New York and New Jersey, by Governors Cuomo and Murphy, simply not addressing mass transit, not advising people to wear masks. And it is a national outrage. I can assure you that if those things were done at that early stage, we would be looking at a much different problem. Also, this paper from Professor Jeffrey Harris from the Department of Education, Department of Economics, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The subways seeded the massive coronavirus epidemic in New York. The abstract, New York City's multi-pronged subway system was a major disseminator, if not the principal transmission vehicle of coronavirus infection during the initial takeoff of the massive epidemic that became evident throughout the city during March 2020. The near shutoff of subway ridership in Manhattan, down by 90% at the end of March, correlates strongly with the substantial increase in the doubling time of new cases in this borough. Obviously, it's a 20-plus page report where he backs up basically everything he's got with his conclusions, his abstract with data. I advise all of you to take a quick look at that. I'll post the link to it, and take a quick look. Again, the messaging that was being done early in this, which was basically social distance, social distance, social distance. But what do you do if you've got to ride a subway where that sort of thing isn't possible? If you've got to ride a bus where that sort of thing isn't possible? Hold your breath. There was no advice. And let's see, we're a little bit out of order here. And again, let me criticize the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention with their $11.1 billion annual budget, and the National Institute of Health, which is ultimately the organization that Anthony Fauci works for, $39 billion a year. And it took the Center for Disease Control with their $11 billion budget until early April to determine that it would be a good idea to wear masks in some circumstances. And again, it's ridiculous, because what we're seeing is 50 state governors who have no idea what they're doing. In some states, you're required to wear masks outdoors, which is silly. I'm going to get to another study just shortly where the transmission in the out of doors is minuscule. But it's still being required. Now, obviously, if you're indoors, if you're around a bunch of people, and maybe even outdoors, if you're around enough of a group of people, you would want to wear a mask. But by and large, if you're outside, you're very, very safe. Again, let's see, getting to this particular paper. Now, this does come directly from China, so obviously, I don't think this should be taken with a grain of salt, though, because what their findings are, I think, are sort of common sense. It just confirms that they've done some study to confirm common sense. But this particular paper from Chinese scientists, among the identified outbreaks, 53.8 involved 3 cases, so on and so forth. Let's see, home outbreaks were the dominant category, 254 of 318 outbreaks. So if you're at home and nobody in the household has the virus, obviously that's about the safest place you can be. But conversely, if somebody in the household does have the virus, chances are pretty good that you're going to get it. And then secondly, followed by transport, no doubt in my mind what they're talking about is mass transport there. And as far as catching the virus externally outside of your home, that is the biggest factor in terms of getting it. That's where the biggest spread is taking place. And also, all identified outbreaks of 3 or more cases occurred in an indoor environment. All of them, which confirms that sharing indoor space is a major SARS-CoV-2 infection risk. Jumping ahead of myself. We identified only a single outbreak in an indoor environment, in an outdoor environment. We identified only a single outbreak in an outdoor environment, which involved 2 cases. And we don't know exactly what those 2 cases involved, but hey, maybe it was just somebody, a couple sharing a romantic moment outdoors, and that would most unquestionably spread the virus. So that's where that is. And again, what we're seeing from the 50 states and from the federal government is a lot of floundering, a lot of excuse making, a lot of finger pointing, and that gets me to tie things back to the UFO issue, because what a lot of people are claiming and what a lot of conspiracy theorists are claiming is this was planned. This was the plandemic. Well, from what I'm seeing is I'm not seeing any sort of plan at all. What I'm seeing is a bunch of fat cat bureaucrats who've been stealing money for years, who only care about their funding and their status and their power. But when the rubber hits the road, when they actually have to do something, they are horribly unprepared. They have no idea what they're doing. So the idea that this is a carefully planned outbreak to cause, taking our rights away or whatever the case may be, no, that's absolutely not the case, because the people who run things, and this the realization of this. I've always been a cynical person. I've never always questioned authority, never trusted authority, but now more than ever, I can see this plain as day. You should always question authority. You should never question authority for one particular reason, and that is they are woefully incompetent. What we've seen again is a federal and 50 state shit show of incompetence. I'm personally embarrassed to be an American over this. What we've seen, again, a bunch of bureaucrats who have no clue what they're doing. And now, of course, they're running out this testing canard. Oh, that makes them look, we're testing, and the tests have to go to the lab. But think about it this way. At the beginning of this, let's say 45 days ago, I don't have the virus. I'm confident that I don't have the virus. But let's say that I tested every day for 45 days. And then tomorrow I go out and I get the virus. So what good were all those 45 tests? They weren't any good at all. So this sort of thing about testing, yeah, sure, if somebody in a house definitely has the virus, you would definitely want to test everybody else in the house. But this kind of widespread testing for this and that, it's just a canard. It's just an excuse to sort of make them look competent and intelligent, when the fact is that they're not. All they are money-stealing bureaucrats. And again, the facts are all on the record. You can look at them yourself, and that is my conclusion. Now, tying this all back to the UFO stuff, okay, you're talking about this gigantic bureaucracy. You're talking about getting results when things matter most. What I see here is, again, the very strong likelihood of complete incompetence on the part of the people who are sort of running this UFO cover-up, maybe trying to reverse engineer technology from a civilization who knows how far in advance of our own. And this points back to an article by my old friend Tony Bergalia. He wrote this late summer of last year. It is clear while technical studies of the craft continue over years, they are based on misplaced efforts and wasted expenditures, and these efforts and expenditures are being exploited for profit in a major way by these engaged contractors. They continue to string along their black budget paymasters with progress reports on a project for which, by its very nature, progress can never be made. Highly secret, highly entrenched, and artful at obfuscation, these defense contractors have been taking the U.S. government and taxpayers for a ride about Roswell for money for years. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think it's just the same kind of thing. Our ruling class is made up by nothing but a bunch of incompetent, lazy, stupid, money-stealing lowlifes. That's what we're saddled with. And that is the very hard truth. And even when the chips are, it's something they can accept when the world is moving along sort of normally. Okay, all they care about is their funding. All they care about is their status. And they don't really accomplish anything. Okay, that's fine. And you can sort of live with that. But again, when the chips are down, when you really need them to come through and lead and do things the right way, you can't. So again, this is something that I've said before, along with some of these virus subjects that we've touched on. It's not something I really wanted to get into, but the circumstances in the world are such that you really can't ignore it. And I was able to provide some information here that you're not going to see in the mainstream media because, yeah, they do have an agenda. There's no question about that in my mind. Again, I think at their core that all this is planned, that some conspiracy theorists are putting out there. No, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's planned at all. I think what you're really seeing is just how incompetent and just how horrible the people who run our country really are. That's what we're seeing. So, all right, that's about all I've got time for you today. We'll obviously be back in touch as soon as something comes up. It might be a feature-related interview or a panel, or maybe it'll be another show like this. Who knows? We'll play it by ear, but when we've got something, we'll get it to you as fast as possible. Thanks for listening in. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week, and thank you so much. Bye-bye now.